Cheers and welcome, friends, to another live Whiskey Me tasting. This month, we are tasting two fantastic distilleries, two distilleries that we are returning to. We don't very often return to distilleries. Done it a few times. I'm trying to think the ones we've done. Glenfarclas, certainly we've done twice. And I think there's one or two others. But Starward and Glenturret are two distilleries we've done. We did Starward only about 6 months ago, back in December. And Glenturret we did back in February of 2021. And they were both very well received. And we thought, well, why not go back? And we kind of promised we'd do Fortis after a bit of a labelling issue back in December. So we had to return to Starward to do that. And with Glenturret, as we're going to see, they got new expressions and some new liquid as well. So we really wanted to showcase some of that. The new packaging looks absolutely fantastic for Glenturret. So to join me and you on this journey this evening, we've got two great guests. From Starward, we're going to be joined by Turtle Higgins. He'll be coming in around about 10 or 15 minutes to talk all things Australian and red wine influenced and delicious. And then as a change to the scheduled program, Jamie Morrison, who's joined us before actually for the previous Glenturret tasting, is currently unwell. So he has twisted the arm of his colleague, Rory Jackson, to come on and talk to us instead. But that's not such a bad thing because fresh meat is always good. And hopefully Rory's going to have some interesting things to tell us about Glenturret and maybe some insight into the liquid as well, which maybe we wouldn't have got from Jamie. Maybe Jamie would have been really boring anyway. So I'm super happy we got Rory. Anyway, without further ado, because I'm definitely starting to ramble, it's because I've already had half a glass of whiskey. I hope you have too. I'm going to introduce Rory Jackson. Hey, Rory.
Hello. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Good, thank you. Sorry for the extended introduction there, the word soup. That you didn't know you were doing this until this morning, so I appreciate you stepping in.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, it's pretty used to Jamie bailing on things last minute, so normally is standing. So it's all good. Happy to be here. So
we'll cool, good stuff. So how long have you been working with the Glenturret then? What's your relationship with the brand?
Coming up to a couple of years now. So came in just after the new ownership. So being involved in that. So not had quite the sort of intel in terms of what Jamie's had from going from Edrington into the new world. So I've seen it with very much fresh eyes and being involved from the start of the new liquid and new design, packaging, and all that. So it's been a fun journey though. It's been pretty exciting and it's been really well received so far. So hopefully this expression will go down well tonight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anyone that's received the tasting card that we sent out will have seen the bottle of the Peat smoked edition, and that's a similar bottle to the most of the sort of range now. And yeah, there you go. Do you know what? I had a bottle and I drank it all. So there you go. That's something. I even thought about keeping hold of it and just filling it up with other liquid just to have something to show. But I think it got thrown away with this week's recycling. But yeah, it was delicious. It's a really tasty dram. So it's a complete change of packaging, though, was what I was getting at. Like it's really a dramatic shift for the brand, isn't it?
Yeah, everything was sort of looked at with new eyes and how we could do things. And the bottle, so as I sort of showed there, so it's a brand new bottle. It's very, very different from your sort of typical sort of whiskey bottle. So you see these indentations down the side. So it has been designed by Lalique, who are partly our new owners. It's kind of a slightly weird setup. It's very much seen as Lalique because there's a lot of Lalique aspects to either the distillery now and the design of the bottles and the fact that we can use their decanters, which is great. But it's actually two owners, so 50-50%, both Swiss guys. A guy, Silvio Dens, who is sort of the chairman, president of Lalique. So that is where the Lalique angle comes in. And then we've also got Hans-Jörg Weiss, who is an American-Swiss billionaire who's just an incredible sort of 80-year-old philanthropist who is doing some really cool projects and things like that. But one of his most active businesses these days is Glenturret. So it's great that somebody with that experience in completely different worlds, but he's still got the energy and drive to get him behind and make sure we're doing things in the right way, or in the way he sees businesses should be run. So it's all quite exciting, but the packaging element is very Art Deco, Lalique inspired. So it's all that comes from that side.
It reminds me a little bit of like some of the old Geneva bottles you see, you know, where they taper out towards the top. They're like sort of broad-shouldered, you know. It's got a little bit of that about it. It's a lovely shape.
No, it is. It's cool, and it's I say it looks a bit different on the shelves. The thick sort of bun at the bottom, like when there's light shining through, it gives some amazing colours. If it was a bit sunnier in Glasgow, where I am, we could maybe get some of that, but unfortunately, that doesn't happen very often. And then people, like you say, when it's finished, a lot of people are using it for either different decanters or water bottles and things like that. So it's a great bottle. It stands out, and it's really exciting.
Yeah. One of our members, Bob, there's just saying that he's using it for an infinity bottle because it is a damn nice bottle for sure. It's not the sort of thing, like I say, mine ended up in the recycling, but you know, to be fair, there's quite a lot of whiskey bottles in this house hanging around.
No, exactly. But it is great because it is a statement piece. It's great that like Bob is using it for things like that, and an infinity bottle is a great idea for it. That is definitely a cool thing to do.
So what about the liquid then? And we'll talk maybe specifically about Peat Smoke Edition, but maybe if you can just like give an overview of what's changed like across the brand in terms of its core range and anything new that's released, that'll be of interest.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously with whiskey, where the new ownership, we're dealing with casks and liquid that has been produced so many years ago, decades, etc. So we are using different people's liquid, but what I think has happened in terms of how we've elevated it, I say Bob Dalgarno, who's a name that's synonymous in whiskey, obviously ex-Macallan whiskey maker for close to 30 years, and we're really lucky to have his services because he's come in, and even though he's been through a lot of stuff, he's come in with a new energy, and he's sort of gone through pretty much every cask. We've sampled everything, figured out what needs to either get re-racked or moved, or what can work with other casks, and how we can get the best out of that liquid. It's not just a case of now, and I don't want to be disparaging to past bottlings, but we were always an afterthought especially when we were at Edmonton. It was very much for blending, famous grouse. So it was like, that will just go into that. It doesn't have to be of the quality that a single malt should. So Bob's come in, complete refresh and a new look at things, and trying to understand what casks really work with our whiskey, new make spirit character, how we can blend different cask types and get the best out of that liquid, and look at different ABVs, and all these things. So completely new outlook on things, and we're getting a lot of awards, which is always great. And it's great to see the core range is really performing well. And it's not just a fancy bottle. The liquid in the bottle is standing up to the tests that the consumers will want, and ultimately people want to drink it and enjoy it. So that's the most important thing. And we've got obviously a big new core range. So we've got Triple Wood, which is our no age statement. Sort of starts that journey, really sort of showcases the character of the new make spirit. And then we move to the 10-year-old Peat Smoke, which we'll be trying tonight. And so that's currently our only peated expression, although might be something coming out this year. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then we move up to the 12-year-old, which is one of the most popular in terms of our drinkers, very classic sort of sherry-driven American and European oak. And we jump up to 15, then 25 and 30. And then we've got some old and rare decanters and things like that coming out as well. So we've got stuff from no age statement right up to some crazy, very exciting stuff, which if you get Bob in a good mood, you might get a little sniff and a sample of. That's rare.
Yeah, well, it's cool. I think it's really great to see the distillery. It seems like it's turning a corner because, I mean, you know, I don't think it's totally unfair to say that it's not in the past at times been held in the highest regard. And, you know, you kind of alluded to that in what you were saying as well, in its position, you know, within the Edrington stable. And it feels like now this might be the turning point. Certainly the branding looks on point and the packaging. And I think if the Peat Smoke's anything to go by, then, the future looks pretty bright for the distillery.
Oh, it really is. And we launched, so we're coming up to our third release, and each year, although the ranges will stay pretty much the same in terms of age statements and similar in styles, we're not trying to recreate any exact recipes. So some years there might be more American oak, some might be more European or bourbon. It's just what Bob feels that year's casks perform at the best. So different ABVs, as alluded to. So it's really quite interesting as well. So like if you enjoy this year's 10-year-old peat smoke, buy next year's and try and work out the differences, and then you can start doing these cool vertical tastings, and it's a bit more almost like wine is the easiest way to describe it. It's like you're never going to have the exact same recipe, but each vintage is different, and some years you might prefer, some years maybe a wee bit to your palate are a bit different. So it's just quite fun and interesting, and not something that's been overly done in the whiskey world. So it's not saying we're revolutionaries, but it's just something a bit different and a little bit fun. And it gives Bob the freedom to do what he does best, and that is to create as good whiskies as he can. He's not hamstrung by anything. He's not been told we need this amount of cases for this, and it's just now let's make the best whiskey we can out of this year's stock, and then we'll cross that bridge later.
Nice. I definitely think sort of championing inconsistency is something that single malt distilleries should do more of. If you want consistent, then I think blends where it's at, and maybe certain kind of stalwart malt expressions from the larger distilleries. But I think the kind of strengths of single malt ought to play to this idea of seasonality and changing, and well, these are the casks we got this year, and this is the the way the harvest went this year, and actually we switched yeast because this one we think is just making better tasting product. Obviously a lot of this stuff happening 10 years ago, but when the product was actually bottled. But even in the blending as well, in the house blending, there's nothing to say. You can't say, well, look, this is the profile that the blender or the distiller wants to work to this year. And this is, for example, with peat smoke, we wanted it to be sooty this year, whereas another year we wanted it to be more like kind of bonfire or whatever. I like that. And, I think a lot of younger distilleries are doing that because they don't have an established house style. And so they can be that little bit more dynamic. But I'd like to see older distilleries doing it more too.
Yeah, no, definitely 100% agree. I think it's nice because like casks are living organisms. It's like there's you could fill 100 of what are meant to be the exact same cask. So say the Spanish sherry oak or whatever, and put the same whiskey in, but you leave it to mature, and each one of those casks is going to be different. So to try and replicate everything, it's like to work back that recipe. It does take the sort of magic, I think, away from it. And as you say, blending is perfect for that. If you want a really consistent malt that you like drinking, blends are brilliant, and you get some brilliant blends. Yeah. But single malts, as you say, they should have a bit more magic about them, a bit more, just something a bit more exciting and different. So I definitely agree. And what the point I was kind of meant, and when you mentioned older distilleries, what I should say is like, hopefully a lot of you guys will know of Glenturret, but also a lot of people don't. And it's just quite funny when you go out and about and explaining to people. It's like you sort of explain, it's like we're the newest old kids on the block. So we are the oldest working distillery in Scotland, and we got more official proof of that after the new ownership, because they actually brought in a historian and went through countless sort of records and found a document from 1763 that stated that we didn't have to pay any tax that year because we hadn't actually been distilling. So we were actually probably older, but that is the oldest date that we've got, and that separates us from some of the other rivals that would like to lay claim to that. So we are proudly the oldest distillery or working distillery in Scotland.
So was that document 1763? Did you say?
Yeah.
So. 1763. So it's already past 250 years, and I mean, like you say, it was already established at that point. So who knows how much older before that? But yeah, that's pretty damn old. There's not many that can trace back to the 18th century at all that are still going now.
No, well, that's exactly. So like any that sort of possibly could, I think, have had any rivals to it are sort of there's no chance of them being resurrected. I think whether they've been built over or whatever. So it's nice to be able to say that, but it's also. So it is. We've got that. We're almost like a new distillery, but we've got this history and heritage behind us, and we've got some great stories, previous owners, and things like that we can look and lean on. So it's very exciting. And what's really nice about the new owners as well, we've not tried to rip out the distillery and put in a lot bigger stills or more stills or all that sort of stuff. We're still going to be small and niche because we are handcrafted. It's what sort of makes us unique. And yeah, we're currently making just over 200,000 litres a year. I think the most we'll ever get to is about 400 to 500 potentially, but that will be the cap. There'll never be any more than that. And I think,
which is pretty small for anyone wondering. That's definitely on the lower end of the scale in Scotland. Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm tasting it. I reckon everyone watching is probably tasting it as well. You should probably taste some.
I know. I was actually, because it was last minute, I was like raking around. I was like, I hope I've got a 10-year-old peat smoke somewhere. I was like, but yeah.
Well, all I've got is what's in this pouch, because like I say, I drank 70 cl of it a week or two ago. But so I mean, so Glenturret's not known for peated whiskey, so presumably there's a couple of weeks of peated production in the year. Is that how it works? Like a lot of distilleries do this, don't they?
Yeah, so it got brought in. So during Edrington times, they wanted to bring out a smoky edition for their grouse. So I think it was Black Grouse it was called.
Yeah.
So that started in 2009. So we've got some 13-year-old casks as our oldest at the minute. So obviously trying to extend the life of some of those to bring out some older stuff potentially in the future. But it is very, like as you say, I'd say 80% of our range is unpeated, and then we've got a small bit of peated stock. So I think we do about a month or so peated runs. They all run through the same stills and everything like that. So it's not separate areas, that everything runs through that. And we work, so the only part of the process we don't do is the malting of the barley. So we use Simpson malters, who numerous distilleries will. And I think the quite interesting thing about the way they peat the barley, certainly for us, is they don't actually dry the barley with the whole process with peat. They sort of wait until it's right down to the sort of like 5% moisture, and then they bring in sort of almost cold smoking at the end. So it's almost like a smoked meat, smoked fish type method of getting the peat into the barley, and it sort of just gives it more of a coating rather than sort of impregnates it. And it's so what a few of those comments are talking about is it's a much softer smoke. And this is what I really like talking about, the 10-year-old peat smoke, because I'm not a massive peated whiskey fan. I think probably got introduced to Lafroig when I was too young, probably. And so I'm definitely more of the sweeter, smoother, elegant side of whiskey. But started with Glenturret and started drinking our peated stock, and I was like, actually, that was really quite approachable. So I try and talk, because there's a lot of people that are indifferent to peat. So I always try and get people to see past that initial smell, because what you'll find with our peated stock is you get that peat initially, or the smoke, and then it sort of fades off for a bit, and then you start getting the sweetness and the character, the new make spirit in there, and then the smoke might come back for a little bit, and then you might, certainly with this one, get a bit of saltiness, get some sweet fruits. You still get some of the spices, but it's a really subtle. It's almost like a dying bonfire sort of smoke. It's that sort of the smoke you get left with after the bonfire on your jacket, and it's just a really nice, approachable peated whiskey, I think, and it's almost like a beginner's journey to it. But it's
one of the icons we put on the pouch was salt and pepper, which I do think is definitely a big part of it, because there is a little salinity there, which would probably point towards being an island whiskey, like Islay or I don't know, Talisker or something, but obviously not. And the pepper as well. That's why we put the seasoning, because there's spice there too. And then definitely some fruit comes through. For me, it varies. Sometimes it's citrusy, sometimes it's more tropical, but it's nice. And then there's that sort of, like you say, that smoke, that oiliness to it as well, which it's really good.
And what I would say is, like, because Simpson maltsters, again, they get their peat from all over. So through each year, we might have peat from the Highlands up in the Lowlands, or up to Orkney, or over to more of the West Coast. And I don't know if we get any from Isla, but certainly get some coastal stuff. So again, each year there will be differences there, and it'll be really interesting to see almost where you could figure out where you think that peat was from that year, or whether it is a blend of stuff. And yeah,
interesting.
It's just so it's but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because I've argued for a while that I think, well, this is controversial amongst certain whiskey people and certain distillers who are championing barley terroir and all this kind of thing, varieties. Not to name any names, but I've often said that peat is one of the sort of truest expressions of terroir in whiskey, because you really are getting the sort of nature of that composition of the peat, whatever vegetal matter it's made of, or whatever the soil is like, or is it close to the sea, or is it close to sort of a forest or whatever. And I do think that comes through in the flavor, unlike some obscure barley variety having been harvested, mashed, fermented with a certain type of yeast, distilled twice, put in a barrel for years on end, and like, oh yeah, cool, I can taste that variety.
Yeah, well, I'd agree with you. I think I get, like, obviously barley types will play a part, but as you say, like, how big that is pretty. Yeah. It could be argued pretty convincingly. But peat, as you say, it is as you say, the truest representation of what that nature is bringing. So it could be like heather dying in there, whatever. There's definitely influences in there linked to, like I say, like wine terroir. If you think of soil types and all that sort of sunlight exposure, all these things will play a big part, and will definitely bring, like, whether it's near coastal, you'll get that salty brininess probably from the sea air. And so, yeah, there's big parts to play in that. And it's interesting to taste these different areas for sure.
Yeah. Right. Talking about tasting a different area, let's go to the other side of the world. It's a very different dram, but, like, amazingly still single malt whiskey. We're not tasting bourbon. It's still just made from malt and from barrels and yeast and all that kind of stuff. Are you familiar with Starward? Have you had much Starward?
I've not actually had too much of it, unfortunately. And I say, Jamie will have taken my taste.
Yeah, he's got a pouch of it. Yours. You have to try and get that off him. Right, cool. Well, look, we're going to introduce Turtle. Hello, Turtle. How you doing?
Hi, folks. How are you all doing?
There you go. Moving into shot. Perfect. Good. Sorry. Thanks for your patience there.
All right. I mean, if we didn't enjoy this, we would be like super chatty people and talking about whiskies, what we love. Yeah. So just sitting and listening to it is perfect.
Yeah.
So
cool. Well, hope you enjoyed it. So, as I said at the start, we did feature Starward back in December, and we did Nova, and it was very well received. And we promised we'd do Fortis as well, which is sort of the bigger brother, I guess. I guess if anyone wants to sort of go back to that video that we did with Callum Rickson in December and kind of get a bit more of a insight into the distillery, they can do that. But I think what would be good to do now, since probably most of the people watching was also members then, because it's the sort of the diehards that watch this kind of thing. They've probably been members for about 20 years. Maybe it'd be interesting for us to talk about what the difference is between Nova and Fortis, and if that involves sort of talking a bit more generally about production and the distillery, then so be it. But if you want to lead it, Turtle, then go for it.
Yeah. So actually, funnily enough, whenever I do tastings or shows or anything, I always actually will go Nova before Fortis, for reasons obviously because the ABV jumps up as well. But Nova, as part of a story, like chronologically, is actually one of the very first ones, and was actually the reason why we started doing red wine and red wine casks, all Australian red wine casks. That one really, at the time when we didn't have any more Apera casks, it was really, we had to use what we had. But as we settled into producing more and more whiskey and these casks, we had more and more relationships with these vineyards and wineries. We could really start to focus on different types of barrels. So all still Australian red wine, But this one's now, it's all American oak, and predominantly in Australian wine production, it's French oak they use. But the big families in your Barossa region, like Yalumba, are famous for just using American oak. Like the Yalumba Octavius Shiraz is famous for just using 100-liter American oaks. So this was really just looking at what does the American oak do. On the flip side of the coin, the left field, which is all French oak, actually really looked at the other side. So it's actually, whenever we do our core range, you can really see side by side, very similar ages, what the wood is doing. And really, we don't really do like a progression of ages, because we don't really age for that long a time, but we can actually go side by side and look at it almost as different characters. And for this one, if your Nova was seen more as, let's say, your classic whiskey cocktails are like, it's a bit more mellow, it's still got your florality and your spice coming from the French oak, this one really has that spice coming from the wines. So this really leans into your bigger, bolder wines of the Barossa region. So your Shirazes and your Cabernets, but also you've got a bigger wood element. So you've got your American oak. So obviously that's going to lean in really heavily to your vanillin, your caramels, your toasty notes sort of come through on that. With that happening, our actual base spirit, which, as Callum said in the previous video, is quite a tropical sort of base spirit. This really, when it was down there, it was nice. It was tasty at about 40%, but it didn't really have that punch that we were looking for. And part of that is a lot of Australian drinkers really like their bigger cask strengths, their 50%. And that was really, it was a nod towards that, but to bring that base spirit back into contention a wee bit. It's not actually a cask strength. Funnily enough, whenever I talk about Fortis, I really go into how the aging process works. And because of the climate, we can age about 4 times quicker than Scotland, which is fantastic because we can get these whiskies really, really quickly and they can be full of flavor. But on the flip side, we lose 6% to the Angel's share. So we could make these like 5, 6, 7-year-olds, but actually you'd lose so much of it. So this one is 50%. We actually go in at 55% to the cask. And because we're losing so much to the Angel's share, and because it's just a dry climate, we actually go up in ABV. So whereas in Scotland, you go in at like 83 and you come down, we go in at 55 and we slowly go up. So at 50%, it's close enough to a cask strength, but it's just coming at it from the other side. So a lot of our single cask release will be about 5-year-old, and they usually go between sort of maybe a 57 to 59 sort of. It depends really on what the seasons were like. The Fortis itself is done in batches. This is technically batch number 6. So this was only released in July 2020. And what we do is about every 3 months, we'll do a new batch. And it really leans into what the climate or the seasons were like. So depending on what the yields of the actual wines were like, it will impact. So at its core, it's still Fortis, but it really will change from batch to batch. So side by side, it might be very, very similar. But if you were to put, let's say, batch 3 to batch 6, you can maybe tell some bigger differences. And I think it's a bit more sort of truthful to what the wine actual industry is, where if you have a bad year or if you have a great year, it is going to impact your final thing. So as Rory was saying, is like really lean into like what the elements are and the ingredients and how they impact, and don't make it so that it's consistent all the time. Actually let those elements shine and really, really push it. So yeah, and Fortis itself means strong, but it means strong more in flavor than it does percentage. Like for a lot of Australians, they're drinking 55%. So 50% to them is like, that's nothing. So they say strong and they're like, it's not actually that strong. But yeah, I always find for this one where...
So how many different wine producers do you...
We've got, it depends really year on year. So we have like our main ones, like your McLaren, your Yalumba, the McWilliams, stuff like that. But it really depends on where we can get them from. So some of our limited releases, like you'll see behind me, there's quite a lot of different releases. And really, if we get a new relationship with someone, they'll maybe give us 20, like maybe we get 7 Marsala casks from one specific person and we do the Dolce. So it's always changing, but it's also growing all the time. So really, we're building these relationships as we get bigger, and we're trying to really celebrate what they're doing. So we've got one coming out later in the year, which is just aged in Yalumba family casks. And that's almost a celebration of their one. Whereas before it was in amongst many different casks, that was just a celebration. So at any one time, I think there's about 20 sort of vineyards, but it's always changing. And they're always like, don't tell everyone all of them as well. So it's kind of like, depends, like some, if you get a bad batch, our coopers know not to go back there. So actually it keeps fluctuating and changing. But it's rare because, you know, Australian wines, like you get really consistent, really good barrels from them all the time. And it's part of why we actually went to do it.
Yeah, well, and it's just such a great representation of Australian spirits as well, because the wine industry is so well established there. I mean, I think it's one of the things I love about Starward is it's like it seems so obvious now that you've done it, but like, why not just put everything in red wine casks, because they're already sat there, right?
I think it was kind of as well, like, because legislation was different there, and it didn't have to be like virgin oak or something like that. Like, we can play around and do stuff like in a ginger beer cask, or like just playing around with different things. So there is that freedom to really just push the envelope. In fact, the name Starward actually is an aspirational name. It's really almost more like go Starward and don't set limits. So it's really, there's a lot of single casks coming out now that might not be 100% wine. So it might be something that's wine adjacent, but actually it's really going like, what else can we do? But obviously the core range is always going to be about these relationships with these vineyards and wineries.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we were talking with Rory about Peat being terroir in Scotland. I guess in some ways, I mean, obviously your climate is part of your terroir and like the rapid maturation, but also these individual vineyards and the kind of character of wine they're producing and what that's putting in the cask, and then, you know, imparting into your whiskey. That's in some sense your terroir, isn't it?
Yeah, because as well, obviously, if you talk terroir, a lot of that gets lost in the distillation process, but we're really taking it in afterwards. So we're getting these big barrels that have all these characteristics. And also, it depends as well, like how strong was the wine? How long was it in it? Is there still a lot of the wood flavor left as well? So there's all these different things that are impacting that generally you don't really have to look at. Because let's say if you're looking at an ex-bourbon cask, it was 5 years that had 83%, whereas we're 5 years that had a 13% wine or something. So actually, there's all these different things. I think the guys say at any one time there's maybe 250 variations of different grapes, cask sizes, woods, different char that you can actually go almost like a larder and really go and experiment with as well. So,
yeah. Nice. Well, so we've got some tasting notes coming through on this one. We got Turkish Delight, mahogany, wild fruits, sweet vanilla, the end, Turkish Delight. There is a kind of rose note. We put rose on the pouch. I mean, it's all the red things. I mean, the symbols we put on the pouch was plums, rose, and cinnamon. So it's sort of like your spice, your fruit, and your floral, you know?
I find as well, like, let's say if your Nova was your like bright, ripe fruits, this is more going into your cooked fruits. In fact, I do a lot of like pairing with foods. Like, I originally actually came from a food background before I came into like drinks and all that. So I'm always thinking with food, and the brand itself, we do a lot of stuff with food. So last night we did a cherry pie with marzipan, and that works really, really well because you're all getting these marzipan notes to come through from the wood on this as well. And you get like, because this is also, it's non-chill filter, there's a lot of your heavy compounds. So it's quite oily as well. So a lot of these sort of heavier sort of flavors that are like sweet, sticky tend to like stick around a lot longer as well. So a lot of your tannin stuff tends to be like drying, but it's also like more cooked fruit, I find.
Yeah, nice, very, very tasty. Cool. Well, I don't know if anyone has any kind of questions or anything like that for the guys before we finish this up. But very insightful. I'm very impressed that we've managed to do the same distilleries and come at a totally different angle. It's a totally new information. and I have learned lots again, which is
funny. It's so I was based in Dundee for the last 18 years, which isn't too far away. So I'm done like comparisons, like just seeing what they're doing and how that region, they're doing like all these new things that every time I've watched videos, there's new information popping up, because it's almost like a new distillery that's doing new things really rapid, even though it's over 250 years old. So
yeah, no, it's cool to see new stuff happening. And so someone, I noticed one of the comments, can't find now, about the Australian whiskey category, and sort of suggesting that some people kind of turn their nose up at it. But my experience has just been that there's some incredible stuff coming out. The only problem is you can't get hold of it. And Starward's one of the exceptions to that rule. We have pretty good allocation of it here in the UK, which you can't say for pretty much any of the rest of them.
I find so Dave Vitale, when he first started, he obviously had this problem where you had all these small batch, expensive, almost collectible whiskies coming out. So there was like beautiful liquid coming, especially from Tasmania and stuff. But he was like, it's not for your collecting cabinet. This should be for your sharing cabinet. So he's like, let's make it attainable, let's make it affordable, and let's really, really get it out there. In fact, some of our expressions are actually easier to get in the UK than they are to get in Australia. Like the ginger beer cask has got like a cult following. So every time that comes out every year, people can only buy one bottle, and it's limited by how much are actually allocated to Australia. So it always sells out within like 10 hours sort of thing. Whereas we've got an allocation here and people don't really know about it yet. So they're really able to like go in, find it, experiment with it. So it's like, it's interesting.
Yeah, we've had that in a Black Rock before a few times. The ginger beer one is good. Yeah.
In Black Rock about 2-3 times a week anytime I'm in London. It's great.
Good stuff.
So the category itself, Australian whiskey, it's definitely getting a hell of a lot more recognition now, because I know obviously you had like best whiskey of the world in 2014. You just had 2020 was best rye, but ourselves, we've just had 12 double golds and 3 golds from the San Francisco Awards. So that's like for just one distillery to be recognized on a global sort of scale like that. It's shown now that people are they're stepping beyond that. Oh, it has to be from these regions. So,
yeah. Well, and it's been good. It's decades established now as well, isn't it? Australian whiskey, like especially like you say with Tasmania, it's been going on a while now. This is not a new thing anymore. Yeah. So it's good to see. Go on.
So even like distilling, it's older than the country itself. It even goes back to like the colonies. You had all these laws that actually predate the formation of Australia. So it is really, there are some ones there that are extremely old that have been doing some great stuff for a long time. But obviously getting it out of the country has been the issue, because everyone sees it, they buy it, they keep it.
So. Yeah. Speaking of old distilleries in Australia, here's one you might not know. I remember when I was doing I wrote a book on rum, and when I was writing the book, I came across an account of the only time I've ever seen this. Australia once had a rum distillery on a boat. I can't remember which river it was on, but it used to sail down the river, and they would process the cane. They'd cut the cane at the banks of the river and process it on the boat, and then ferment and distill into rum. So it's like a moving distillery.
That's sustainability before sustainability. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So have to look.
It's sustainability and it's innovation for alcohol amongst thirsty Australians as well. I like a drink. Cool. All right. Well, Rory, thank you both so much for joining tonight. Appreciate your wisdom and your chat about the distilleries and the drams and everything. It's been really cool. And we'll hopefully see you another time. Although not too soon, because we can't keep on coming back to Glenturret and Starward all the time. It'll be a bit while. But Rory, you were every bit as good as Jamie, if not better.
Appreciate that. I'll buy you a drink next time I see you. Yeah.
All right, cool. And thanks everyone for tuning in.